Tighten up, leaders. Welcome to the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership, the show that drills into the foundations of what leadership is all about. I'm your producer and co-host, Hali Gibson.
And I'm your host, Billy Duren.
Join us as we sit down with leaders from across the country to mine for nuggets of wisdom.
All right, everyone, welcome into the meeting room. Today, we're going to be talking about leadership because this is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast. I'm the host, Billy Duren, and I'd like to welcome into the meeting room producer and co-host, Hali Gibson. Hali, welcome to the meeting room.
Great to be here.
I'm waiting to hear your nugget of the week. I've actually was with you the other night when we were at a conference, and I heard a nugget potential. Did it make it or not?
Well, I'm going to save that one.
Okay.
I'm going to save that one because just this morning I was driving into work and I pass a school every morning. And the parking lot that all the students park in, there's a gate to it. And I always see this gate open, and there's a sign that says, "Please close gate." And the only reason why I can see that sign is that the gate is never closed. And I have a philosophy degree, so a lot of the times I think about, what is the philosophical context in this? And all I can think about is the free rider problem, which is, for the philosophy nerds out there, essentially people will take advantage of a public good. And these students, they're doing just that. They're walking through the gate. They don't want to take the time to close it because there's always going to be another student behind them until that last student goes through the gate. And are they going to close it? And I think the leadership aspect of this is if we're always waiting for the person behind us to do the thing that we're supposed to do, then we're never going to accomplish anything.
I think for all of us that are not philosophical nerds, more comical nerds, that would be me. That's funny to see a gate. The gate must be closed. The only reason you can see it because the gate's open. So, Hali, I'm excited to welcome into the podcast today Lisa Tilley. Lisa is the founder and president of Lisa Tilley Consulting. Lisa's work focus has been in the employee stock ownership plan market space as a management consultant serving ESOP plan sponsors and the board of directors throughout the United States. Lisa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, and Lisa and I met in the work that she's doing as a consultant. She worked with our company for years. And, Hali, we ask leaders all the time, who are people that influenced us? Over the segments that we've been doing on our podcast, I've thought about that question for myself. Who are the people that have influenced me? And I've probably have a dozen people in my professional career, a dozen people in my personal career, but Lisa Tilley would definitely be on the list of someone who has impacted my life as a leader. Lisa serves on numerous boards, including nonprofits, ESOP boards, and is nationally featured speaker and author concerning ESOPs. And other than her family, she is most famous for being a Hokie from Virginia Tech. So, Lisa, we're happy to have you today on the podcast.
Again, thank you for having me today. I've been excited since I found out I was going to be here, and I will be in Blacksburg on Friday and hopefully Sunday at the NCAA women's basketball tournament. So yes, Hokie through and through. I enjoy my work with TFI so much. As you mentioned, I started out as a consultant and I joined the board in 2018. And it's been really rewarding work. And for you to say, I'm an influence in your life, that makes me very humble. And I would say the same about you. I think I've told you before, I feel like we grew up in the boardroom, really building the governance system for our company. And it's been a pleasure, Billy. I look forward to this discussion today.
So, Lisa, we've talked about this, and you've been a part of some very successful organizations, but several years ago, you began your own company. What was the transition like for you from moving from employee to owner? What was that journey like?
Well, it was definitely more pressure because it was me and only me, but also had more control over my life. I had to learn how to say no. Really to kind of develop a business model that had seasons. What I do has seasons to it where it's very intensive in some months versus others. And, learning what that was going to look like and honing in on the things I liked best, where I brought the best value to my clients was an adjustment, figuring out what should my business model look like. And then trying to turn it off and keep that balanced life. What was a struggle in year 1 and 2, for sure. I'm doing better at that now.
So, Lisa, I know that I know a lot of people that have started their own business, and the scary element of that, that security of holding on to being a part of an organization, to jumping out there on your own. What was those first little bit like? So when the idea begins to develop in your mind, and then you take the leap. What did that feel like? I mean, from an emotional standpoint, what was that like as a, oh my gosh, did I just do this?
Right. Well, yeah, it's the most risk I've certainly had ever taken. I started my career working for the largest accounting firm in the world, that had endless resources everywhere, I could dial or log into. So, just being me and myself, it was different. I felt the risk for a little bit, but the confidence quickly built as I had the ESOP community reach out to me saying, hey, I know someone needs help. Here's a contact. And so it took off really fast. So I didn't have long to sweat it, I'd have to say.
Well, I can tell you this, and knowing you through our time of knowing each other, and the invaluable resource that you are to our team and have been to so many. Lisa, I was actually talking to a young leader this past week, and very early on their journey, and I mentioned something to them about looking back. I said, one of these days you're going to look back at your. He was in his early 30s. I said, one of these days you're going to look back in your early 30 journal, and you're going to be reading what you wrote about yourself when you were 30. And when you get to be my age, you look back and, what is that going to look like for you, Lisa? So your career started with one of the biggest firms in the world. Now you're out there doing it on your own. When you look back at Lisa Tilley's 30-year-old journal notes, how are they going to be different in regards to what you know about leadership then and what you know about leadership today?
Ooh, quite different. When I was 30, I was working for a national trust company, and I think I valued the technical. I wanted to be the best technically at what I was doing. With my accounting work and other stuff supporting this trust company. But I had a lot to learn on the communication side and how to problem solve. I thought my technical skills would help me solve any problem and have an answer quickly. But I learned, as from 30 on, the first thing you need to think of when you have a problem is, okay, what do I need to learn to get closer to an answer? And then where do I look? What are my resources and how I learn about this? You don't have the answer right away. Sometimes you need to do some research and then come back. And it's okay to say, I don't know right now. I tried answering, I'd say, pretty quick in my 30s, where now I'm a little more methodical and step back and look at things from 30,000 feet, 50,000 feet. You've heard me say that quite a bit. Let's go up in the clouds and look down and think about this a bit. I didn't quite know all that.
So, Lisa, I'm thinking about this. When you said that, you wanted to be so technically good at what you do. And I'm thinking about, now I immediately went back to where I was when I was 30 years old. And similarly, I wanted to be really good at my task. I wanted to be good at I was in sales, and I wanted to be great in the sales space. But I really wanted to develop as to who I am. I was really developing what I do, but I'm not sure I spent a whole lot of time developing who I am. So as in that journey, and kind of was the next question is why it's so important, I believe, to talk about the journey is there's actually an evolution that goes on in our lives when we're so heads down. We call heads down work, doing the daily task, into moving into more of a head up leader. For you, what was that like and even from recognizing it, when you started recognizing, I've got to, if I'm going to move through my career, if I'm going to be an impactor, influencer, leader, I've got to start working on who I am as a leader and what that looks like. What was that like for you?
I was put into a leadership role pretty quickly in my life. I had a staff of 15, I think at 25, and I was ill prepared, but I had someone invest in me and help me develop. But just that recognition that in the whole, you need to understand the business model of the company you're in, understand what they do and how it's organized, how you fit in. And then leaders retire. So where are the next leaders going to come from? A lot of them come from inside an organization. And also, I was with a company that was growing dramatically. And so we were all trying to keep up with the company that we were growing. And we had to develop and recognize that we needed to bring in some coaches, some trainers, some materials to help us to be able to meet the needs of the organization we were in. But sometimes it's a stark realization, a couple Saturday morning meetings with leadership going, I don't think this team has enough to do what we've grown. So what do we need to do? And let's roll up our sleeves. But that leadership journey, so some people it just sort of happens to, some people get to the 50,000 cloud level to be able to look down and go, how can I fit in and how can I be of value earlier in their career? But the view changes too. And being flexible enough to be able to move with what the organization needs is an important leadership skill. When I worked for that trust company, I had 3 different jobs, because they needed me to do something else was more important at the time, and I was flexible enough to do it.
This happens to me in my life. A word will pop up and then it'll start popping up everywhere. I've heard you say it. I've said it. I was on the phone with somebody before we did the podcast today, and the words develop and unfolding and developing, how things develop in our life. We develop as leaders. And I'm thinking about how, you described yourself as someone who wanted to be great at their task, someone that was a doer. And what are the risks for leaders, Lisa? When we take someone who's great at being a doer, who's great task oriented, why does that not always automatically mean they're going to be a great leader of people? They're good at what they do. Why isn't it just automatic that they become a leader of people?
It's not automatic. In public accounting, which I grew up in for almost 15 years, you made manager in year 4. Well, you can't really sometimes take an accountant and they're a great manager of people and processes. And they might not be able to see the future of how the processes could change to make the organization better. And if you don't have that, talent needs to be developed. So in an organization where current leadership is investing in that next tier of leadership, that's where you get strongly the team coming together. But other people, need to be invested in at times. And I'm fortunate enough that I had some great leaders in my life that have invested in me. And I try to pay that forward.
So, Lisa, one of the things that we've talked about in our relationship over the years, and now you're helping our company directly, one of the many benefits that you bring to the organization is you actually use this phrase. I thought it was really cool, and it's really very descriptive for me. You get to peek in the windows of a lot of businesses. And since this is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, and we want to talk about what leadership looks like, what have you defined as some of the 2 or 3 key pieces that leaders may be overlooking in their role as leaders? And when we talked about developing leaders, that would probably be in that list. But what are a few things that you're noticing that leaders are missing?
The benefits of having 1 or more outside board members is a big one. Bringing in some skills that the organization doesn't have, and maybe it's just a viewpoint that's different. It really can add to an organization. And I think any board that brings in their first outsider will tell you they're a stronger board, and that gets overlooked a lot of times especially mid-sized companies and small companies. I think the pace at which they develop leaders sometimes is too slow. How do you get it just right? Billy, we were at dinner with a president of another company that you're affiliated with. And I asked him, I said, what do you do when you need like 1.5 leaders in an area? What do you do? Because you don't want to go ahead and get the one, and then the growth doesn't keep going. And then you're, top heavy. And he was scratching his head going, good question. And I think that we kept saying, well, maybe the leaders need to get together. If one needs half a body and one needs half a body, write a job description to marry those 2 half bodies together and hire someone. Because you don't want to get caught short when you're in growth mode. Because that's the worst thing you do. You burn out your team. That's what we try not to burn out our team at TFI. We like everyone to refresh, but get the resources before. It's hard to balance it out, but don't be late in developing your leaders. Some get caught short. I think one thing we have talked about quite a bit is that benefit of quiet time. Getting away from, noise can be good or bad. Bird singing is a noise. Humming is a noise. But the operation of a business is very noisy. And when you are, charged with governance and strategy, and you're also charged with being involved in the day-to-day operation, it's very hard to separate yourself. And I find leaders make the mistake. They can't get away enough to get strategic in that different viewpoint. And when they do, kind of clear the decks and make some time, there's always healthy progress. There's always a reward, even if it's recognizing a problem, in your quiet time and thinking and writing about the organization. That gives you a heads up. If you hadn't have taken the time, you might not have seen the problem early.
So, Lisa, I hope I don't get penalized for this, but when I think with a blank piece, I have to think with a piece of paper and a pen. It's hard for me to just sit and think. As things come in my mind, it seems like I have to write them down. I know that might be a challenge for some. Some is better in the total quiet, and even having a way to calendar in that time. I was with some leaders that I really think a lot of this past week, and one of the things we talked about is how do we calendar in time for quiet? Because if we're not careful, we'll look forward and our entire day is filled for the next 6 weeks. If we're not careful, we've got calendar overload at times. So, Lisa, you say in your bio you're a self-admitted work in progress. And one of our previous guests, he said, shouldn't we all consider ourselves emerging leaders? Do we ever really arrive? And how would you tackle that? Do we ever really arrive?
That this was probably an area where I've got a little bit of guilt, and I'll explain what I mean. I think Alexander Hamilton might be a good story here. It was a part of the U.S. government, and he actually developed the U.S. Treasury system that still is in existence today. He was our first Treasury Secretary, but he had a problem where nothing was ever good enough. And he spent a lot of time just reinventing, taking one step forward. And his efforts resulted in the U.S. Treasury system that still stands hundreds of years later. But it was a huge sacrifice for his family, to do that. So, would he ever be satisfied? The answer was no. And it was kind of a detriment. So, I think I pull back and say, we've always got work to do, but make sure that you're balancing what you're trying to do with a balanced life so that you don't have regrets. That makes sense.
It does. In our leadership journey, and when we talk about evolving and ever arriving, just had the privilege today to speak. One of our retirees just past December stopped by my office today, and we were talking about what that looks like, for him. And, my runway is getting shorter, Lisa, and I know that one day that day is going to be a reality for me. And I can't imagine what it is going to be like to not continue to be merging into whatever I'm going to be when I grow up one day. That journey for me is still a challenge in my mind. So as you're working with leaders and people, especially in the season of my life, how are you helping them prepare for that? It's an interesting thought process for me because, you and I've talked about a lot about this. How do you help leaders prepare for the next part of their story?
I tell them don't wait too long to retire. First of all, my grandfather was an economist and he retired at the age of 69, and he wanted to retire at the age of 65. And Virginia Tech could not find another professor for all that time. But he told me, don't stay too long, because your perspective changes and you should move on to other stuff in life to get more of you fulfilled in other ways. So to prepare for it, I think you need to know what are some interests that you're going to have on the other side and develop those before retirement, I think. And I'm going to be dealing with this with my husband, who's older than I am and planning to retire earlier. Have your own interests, but have a management succession plan. And how I help people is I tell them the war stories of how I see it done badly. A leader who steps away but is still a ghost in the machine, is in touch with all the employees and undercuts, the decisions of current management through back channel conversations. These things happen all the time. I try to prepare leaders that you cannot be the ghost in the machine when you step away. Also, your job as a leader who's going to be rolling out is to prepare the team for when you're gone. And that involves a lot of letting go. And you've got to figure out your own way to do that. But I have one story is a company I worked with where the gentleman who the president didn't want to retire, but he couldn't keep a COO. They kept leaving. And so, of course, I said, there's something wrong with you. So when you hire a good one, 6 months in, I'm sending you to Hawaii for 2 weeks with your wife, and you're not allowed to use your phone for business. It can get you in case of emergency. They can call the hotel. It's not that private. This is your problem. You don't know how to let go. So, kicking and screaming, he got on the plane. He went to Hawaii, had a great vacation. He came back. They still have that COO, and it's been 12 years. And that COO is getting ready to step into the president's job and has already hired his replacement because I forced that gentleman to let go of control. He was not chasing off management, that he was micromanaging them, second guessing decisions. So, the war stories help people kind of frame up, what do I need to do to get my team ready? And then what do I need to do to get myself ready?
Well, I can tell you this, if there's anybody listening today thinking that she didn't actually say there's something wrong with you, I can assure you that's probably exactly what she said. There's our nugget so far, Hali. There's something wrong with you. That's just what every leader wants to hear.
He was going through his new COO every 6 months. It was him for sure.
All right, you're on the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, and we'll be right back.
Threaded Fasteners is a 100% employee-owned company whose mission is to create value in and for the people we serve. So, if you're interested in learning more about how we develop a people-centric culture, or if you're interested in a customized fastener solution, send us an email at culture@threadedfasteners.com. That's culture@threadedfasteners.com.
All right, everyone, we're back with Lisa Tilley, and she's dropping some nuggets, and I hope you're taking notes on these things. When we left, we were talking about how leaders prepare themselves to move, and we're going to kind of take a step back, Lisa, more kind of focus on that younger leader now. Speaking to them directly, what are some of the hurdles that you see the young emerging leaders? Well, we've kind of defined everyone's still emerging, but young leaders in particular that are still trying to find their voice in the organization, how would you advise them to step forward and make their self known in their company?
Well, we've talked about this with people. We just start noticing. Well, why do we start noticing them in a large organization? It's because they get their stuff done well and on time, and then they help those around them who might need some help. So they're lifting others up around them, and then they ask for more stuff to do. That's really my definition of an emerging leader. They're taking on more. They can handle what we give them and accomplish it well, and just want to make the whole organization better.
So, Lisa, some organizations may not have the networking or the platform for them to make themselves known. So in those organizations where they may feel a little stifled, how would you encourage them to step forward? We've got a mechanism, so to speak, to recognize them and put them forward for considerations in a lot of different ways. But what about companies that don't really have that? How would you encourage that one to step up and say, hey, one of Hali's favorite phrases, hey, put me in, coach, let me have a try. How would you encourage him in that area?
Well, I think, asking for a meeting with their supervisor is one way to go, but you need to be prepared for that meeting, and you kind of need to know what you want out of that meeting. I always say when we're having a meeting with management, we need to respect their time, because there's a lot of, things that need their attention. And so how would you prepare for that meeting? I came down and visited in February and spoke with several, of our emerging leaders and encouraged them to write about what they accomplished in the last year in their area of responsibility, what they didn't get to that they wanted to get to last year in their area, and then what their goals for the next year for accomplishments and progress in their area of responsibility. What do they want to get done, and then what resources do they need? And then I encourage them as they write, always look back at your prior writings and look for, threads. But once you start thinking this way about your impact, start speaking with your supervisor about it, ask for a meeting. but be prepared about what you want to talk about and let them know ahead of time what you want to talk about in that meeting.
Very good. Haley?
So as we talk about the emerging leaders who are looking to kind of step up, what would you say about the developed leaders who have kind of found themselves in a lull? They're really not, as we would like to say, leveling up. How can an established leader take that lull and push forward with leveling up?
Well, developing sounding boards for sure. I think most leaders have reached outside the organization to find sounding boards, people in your profession, out of your profession, in similar professions that can be, their opinion is of value, and start talking about things that matter to you. And hey, find out what other people and other companies are doing in your position. Use your network and figure it out. But the charge for mature leaders is that they need to keep their finger on the pulse of the company to understand what the company needs. And that's one of Billy's huge skills, is that you are so in tune with TFI, you can see before anybody else at that organization what TFI is moving towards needing. You've got the sixth sense, Billy. And that's what leaders need to continually do. As we're growing, we have developed our leaders. Everyone's been to courses, everyone's read, participated in training, helped develop some curriculum for our own TFI University to train our other folks. But, to level up, Alexander Hamilton was never satisfied. Good leaders are typically never satisfied either, and want to just make sure they understand what the organization's going to be needing in the next year, in the next 5 years, because that's really their job.
I think that burnout is one of those words that it's kind of in the corporate realm of things, something that keeps coming up. And one thing that I have seen in a lot of those established leaders who are in that lull, I don't like to say that it's burnout, but it could be that, they've done so much and then they find themselves kind of in this lull and they don't really know how to push forward because maybe they did do a lot of that forward thinking kind of a thing, but a lot of a really good leader knows that even if you were forward thinking for a long time and it maybe didn't get done in the time frame that you wanted it to be, like you said, Billy knows, what we need, but he also knows that we might not need it now. And so I think that for a lot of leaders who might be facing that burnout, know that, like Simon Sinek would say, business is an infinite game. This game is never going to end. So you're always going to be playing. So keep the course, keep moving forward.
Right. And, developed leaders also may change what their passions are. They may say, this area of the business just doesn't excite me anymore. I need to develop or plug in other folks here so I can spend my time on things I want to concentrate on more. And that's not admission of failure or anything. A good leadership team takes a group of individuals that have strengths, they have weaknesses, they have flaws. Yes, I have flaws. And we kind of supplement for other people's strengths and flaws with our strengths and bring all our strengths together so that the team is better. And I think, senior leaders, trying to hone in on what they really want to do for the organization to keep fresh, to keep from getting stale and in a lull, I think is perfectly acceptable. And I see it all the time. A lead engineer for a huge company suddenly says, I want to be the safety director, because they're burned out, but they still can give back. And safety's kind of been their thing, and designing, stuff in that industry. So, it's okay to shift duties if you get stale.
One thing that I've heard when we've been talking recently, and I love this phrase, leveling up. I stole it. I stole this from Tracy Till. Tracy was one of our podcast guest early on, and Tracy used this phrase in a meeting that we were together in not long ago, and I love the idea, that the wording and the phrasing, leveling up, because it, quite frankly, it talks about many leaders will kind of hit plateaus and they're unable to level up. They have got this ceiling, they can go this far, and they're either unwilling or unable to level up to what we say all the time, the next level. And if we are not careful, leaders can hit that burnout. They can hit that. A good friend of ours, Rick Scruggs, he used to call that ceiling of complexity. You would hit that ceiling and you'd bump up against it enough, And if you were not able to level up, you actually start going in the other direction. So we have to be careful as leaders to watch out for leaders that are going through and struggling with that. But I think it's also an opportunity for us to either bring in new team members to help level up or coach others in those positions and encourage them to level up. Because when we kind of ride both pieces of the horse, we got two seats on the horse, what's now and what's next, it's hard if you aren't able to level up. What's next gets frustrating if you aren't able to think about leveling up. So I appreciate you saying that. Lisa, I was going to ask you some questions about executive coaching, but actually when you said you're the problem, I think that was telling us a little bit about how some executive coaches went before. And I was a little afraid you might tell people how many times you've had to chastise me in that executive coaching role. But when you think about, your role as an executive coach, what a privilege it is to be invited into someone's life and say, show me my blind spots, help me with those areas where I am, that I may not even recognize where I struggle. What is that vulnerability like when you're talking with a leader? What is that? How do you get started in those conversations?
That's a perfect word, vulnerability. Because I do get C-suite executives to be vulnerable in their conversations. And most of them I have a board meeting tomorrow and you have to help me with this. I can't think, and so a lot of times I get paid to help people think, and I'm not necessarily giving them an answer, but you're creating communication that they can see all the different paths before and then kind of pick the right one. So I got to help people talk around the barn, and it's a lot of it is about letting go. Leaders have trouble. They develop habits. We all do. And, as you're developing your number two, you have to recognize one day, okay, they're further enough along. I need to start giving them more responsibility where they have autonomy and they're not going to ask me as many questions and they're starting to make decisions. But that letting go is difficult. That's my story about my executive I had to send to Hawaii for 2 weeks. He had to learn to let go. But when you do, the confidence of the team goes up, and it just seems to gel the team more when the top leader can start letting go, or the one who's trying to develop other talent.
So Lisa, when you're working with a leader and you start seeing someone who's willing to be vulnerable in those areas of blind spots, and that either means that they start working on that area or they bring someone in that can strengthen up that area, and you move them to more of a strategic thinking, strategic decision making. How do you know when to make that shift? When you go from this tactical day-to-day stuff, bringing leaders into that strategic thinking model, tell us what that's like for you.
You mean as people are changing positions?
Yes.
Within the company? Okay. I have been a part of a lot of shift changes, as I said, lead engineers, now the safety director. But in the C-suite, you see the elevation. Leaders do retire, and other people have to rise to take their place. Their duties have to be split at times, or sometimes new talent needs to be brought in about 5 years before the leader retires. And I just try to bring clarity to them. How do they get to where Billy Duren is, that you've got your finger on the pulse and can tell what TFI needs before anybody else? How can they get to that spot that they understand the organization so well? And, at times they need outside training on governance and strategic thinking. Sometimes they need more quiet time. And sometimes they just have to step back from the day-to-day operation. It can be painful, but it's an unwinding, of some duties and then movement to another. I always tell people, if you're expecting to go forward, be laying the bricks behind you for your team to walk down. Make sure it's an easier path than you had when you took over the responsibilities they're about to take over. And when you do that, everyone seems to be prepared. When you get a promotion, people are all focused on a new job, but there needs to be as much focus on the responsibilities they're leaving behind to make sure there's no holes in the boat and the system still working.
Very well said. And I think that there are a lot of times when we are making evaluations for going forward, whether that's forecasting or, projections for strategic thinking, some of the best models to look forward is where we just came from. So that's a great picture for us to see, laying the bricks behind you. Lisa, so kind of moving towards the conclusion here, I've known you for a lot of years and I've watched your heart to serve your clients. Is there still room for servant leaders in this dog eat dog world that we live in?
Oh, absolutely. Especially in the employee owned world where companies, are owned by the employees. It is less of a dog eat dog world. I have chosen it on purpose because the goals of employee owned companies where everybody wins is more in line with my basic, core principles. But there's definitely room. There's lots of good stories out there. With TFI, we have a monthly call with some of our leaders, and the development of that is just fantastic. It's the same, is that there's room for good. Everyone's got each other's back. When one order needs to go out and one team's not enough, another team's jumping in. There's great stories like that in ESOP companies where it's not all about me, it's about the team. And when that core principle's there, are humble, hungry, aware, when we really focus on that, it's a different world in the ESOP world. So there's still room for people to have servant hearts, and certainly in, non-ESOP companies too, but stories are just better over on the side.
For every leader that we have on the podcast, we like to ask them a couple of questions, one of which is, who is a leader that has influenced you throughout your life?
Mary Kay was my leader at the trust company. She was the boss, and she put that habit, she forced on us that we had to do our own performance reviews. And then she reviewed our performance reviews and said what she agreed with, what she didn't. And she always had great comments, but she forced us to analyze our own performance. And that was hugely helpful to me to put it all together.
And Lisa, can you tell me what you're reading?
I'm not reading a business book right now, but I am reading The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride right now.
So Lisa, I know you've read business books over the years, and we like to drop these business books in our notes of the podcast. So what is a book that you might want to point a young leader to? Not only that, one of the things that we close with on our podcast every time is we say, okay, Lisa, we're bringing leaders in just like you, and then we have a bunch of emerging leaders and even people in this organization that really haven't even decided yet that they can be a part of the leadership team here or the influence team here at Threaded Fasteners or the other organizations that are listening in. What would you say to that leader if they were sitting in the room with us today? What can they do today to get started in their leadership journey?
Do some reading, and I like the books that address habits. What are the habits of a professional or a business person that really do lead to success if you do them over and over? And so, the 7 Habits by Stephen Covey. And then there was this book, I think it was last year or maybe earlier, this Be the Unicorn with William Vanderhosen. It's talking about the habits that, separate leaders. And it's good stuff.
I think that's the first time on the podcast that we have had 2 leaders in a row mention the same book, and the Be the Unicorn.
Was that Chris Hicks?
Chris Hicks mentioned Be the Unicorn, and that's two episodes in a row. Yeah,
and Chris served on the leadership panel with you that we had down here in Mobile a couple of years ago. So back to back, the Unicorn gets the nod. So Lisa, we just want to tell you again, thank you for your time. I know you're busy and I know your schedule is filled up. So we appreciate the time that you've given us today on the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast. So thank you again.
Thank you for the opportunity. I hope I've shared some nuggets of gold and truth. Just expect bumps down the road. But when you plan and have those habits, success really can be yours if you're diligent. I have one saying, it's a Native American saying that I would tell all leaders. It says, never follow the leader that is in love with power more than in love with people. So stick to your love of people, and it'll keep you right almost every time.
Very well said. Lisa, we'll see you down the road, and Hali and I will be right back. All right, everyone, welcome back. What a great interview with Lisa Tilley. Lisa, in full disclosure, Haley, Lisa, just to let everybody know, Lisa is one of our board members. Lisa resides in Roanoke, Virginia with her husband, Mike, and has been working with Threaded Fasteners for quite some time and now serves as a external board member for our company. I love Lisa's a lot of ideas that she had, and I'm gonna toss it over to you for your nuggets before I give you mine. We probably have some of the same ones, so go ahead.
I think that a lot of the things that Lisa says, we hear a lot. One, she is a piece of our team, so a lot of her language is going to resonate with a lot of what we say. Her 3,000 feet? How many feet?
50,000.
50,000 foot view. And that's something that we can all look at for all aspects of our lives. Take a step back in whatever maybe it's a problem, maybe it's a project, maybe it's a person, and let's take a 50,000 foot view of what that problem is and look at it as a holistic way.
So you're a young leader. You have a staff now. Are you prepared to say there's something wrong with you?
Well, I like to say there's something wrong with me. I mean, and I'll share that there has been a change in my viewpoints on a lot of different ways that I communicate with our teams. And I just shared with somebody very recently is that I have a blind spot in some of these things, and being able to voice that to someone and having the trust with that person to say, look, I need you to check me on this thing because I'm not seeing it in the way that I think that other people in our team are seeing it. And so I need to work with you on this. And that's something that I think takes a lot of trust. It takes a lot of trust in me and my team in me.
Very good. So my number one nugget was never follow the leader who has a love for power more than he has a love for people. And we can certainly see that. We have experienced leadership in various roles throughout our careers. You just getting started in your career, even though you're a veteran now, seeing leaders and how they lead. And I think over this time that we've talked with our leaders that we've brought in, there's a shift. There is a shift. There's no more we're going to slam our hand down on the table. And I think there's a shift. Are all those leaders gone? Absolutely not. But I do think there is a shift moving towards a more cooperative spirit in the matter of leadership and following after people who are not in search of power, but are in search of developing people. One of our strategic anchors, people developers at Threaded Fasteners. So, Haley, I'm going to give you the last word.
Tighten up.
Tighten up.
Thank you for joining the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, brought to you by the employee owners of Threaded Fasteners. If you enjoyed our conversation, please subscribe to, rate, and review the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Do you have a leadership story to tell or a question to ask? Email us at podcast@threadedfasteners.com. That's podcast@threadedfasteners.com. This show is made possible by our family at Threaded Fasteners, Inc. Our mission is to create value in and for the people we serve. Interested in learning more about TFI and how we create value in our team, in our communities, and in our customers? Visit threadedfasteners.com. Thank you again for listening. I'm your co-host and producer, Haley Gibson.
And I'm your host, Billy Duren.
This show is edited and produced by Johnny Glenn and our friends at Deep Fried Studios.